This is a tier 15 map boss that has over 1 million hit points, and look at how fast his HP is already dropping. But what's crazy is that this is actually a ramping DPS build. So think about the DPS in the beginning, and now look at the damage now that the build is fully ramped. This guy is getting absolutely annihilated, taking tens of thousands of damage per second, and that's because of an incredibly powerful interaction with critical hit chance and critical hit damage. Basically, the Omen Scepter allows you to get insane crit chance, and the combination of the Scepter rolls and the passive tree allows you to get wild multipliers on your crit damage. The end result is what you are seeing. And you might be thinking like, okay, like this looks pretty good, but is this, is this the peak of what minions can do? And the answer is absolutely not. I currently only have 4 ascendancy points. I am missing a huge chunk of damage and a huge chunk of survivability. And you can see that despite missing both of those things, in this fight I took a full slam from Zekio the Head Crusher straight to the dome, and I was able to just face tank it and live. This build is very tanky as well as doing tons of damage. So how does the Omen Scepter work? How is it that the crit is so powerful? Well, if we look at Malice, Malice is going to apply crit weakness, and that crit weakness is going to be an additive crit chance. So if we look at our minions, by default, they're actually going to have a 5% crit chance that is going to be scaled by all of their crit chance multipliers, and you can see it's sitting at 11.8. Not very impressive. But with the Omen Staff with Malice, Malice is actually going to be increasing the base crit chance of the minions, which, without getting into all the math, basically means their actual crit chance is going to be closer to 40 or 50% rather than the 11.8 you're seeing right now. And so you're going to get them to 40 or 50% crit chance once the Malice buff is fully stacked, and they're going to just be pumping crazy damage. You can see I have allies in my presence do bonus crit damage, allies in my presence have bonus crit chance, and if we go into the passive tree, right here we have increased crit chance for our minions, and then over here we have crit chance, crit damage, and down here we have even more crit damage. And you can start to see why these numbers are so insane. See, for most damage it's all going to be additive, but for this crit damage bonus, this is all multiplicative, and that's how it's doing so much freaking damage. And what's cool about it is, yeah, skeletal brutes are going to be the best thing for bossing, and I'm going to talk about more about why that is later. But this also works with the skeletal arsonists, which are much better for farming than the brutes are. So for mapping, you have these crazy powerful, super hard hitting arsonists that do crazy AoE damage, and then you pair them with flame wall, so they're doing even more damage and they're critting and doing crazy DPS. And then you have the brutes who just never die, face tank everything, destroy bosses, and are just very powerful in general. And the final piece of this build, in terms of our damage profile, right? So we're getting all this crit chance, we're ramping our minions, they're doing super insane damage. Then we play Detonate Dead. See, Detonate Dead's damage is based on the maximum health of the corpse that you target. So when the mob gets tankier, Detonate Dead does more damage, and this works with all of your multipliers. So on Detonate Dead, we have magnified effects as increased area. We have spell echo, so it casts twice every time we cast it, and this is phenomenally powerful. And the double casted effect is going to have even bigger AoE. And then we have considered casting, which gives it a 25% multiplier. But when we go into the passive tree, we're also getting 8% spell damage, 8% spell damage, 8% spell damage, 16% spell damage. And all of that adds up to like an extra like 35% damage on the Detonate Dead. And as you can see from the clips, all of that combined is enough to like one-shot packs once you get a corpse going. You just get this like crazy death ball going where you're just spamming Detonate Deads and everything's blowing up. And the AoE speed of this build is actually very impressive, and you can see because it's percent mob health scaling, even in the 15s, this build does quite a bit of damage with the Detonate Dead. This is just a really solid skill, and I definitely wouldn't play without it. So that's how the build is doing so much damage, and make sure you stay tuned, because at the end of the video I'm going to talk about army composition and why you're seeing me swapping out minions. But first we need to talk about the defensive profile of the build. So the Scepter is the most important thing offensively. And what's great is, because we're a minion player, all of the rest of the roles on our entire gear set can be dedicated to defense. Because aside from 2 roles, one on the helmet we need ranks of minion skills, and 2 on the chest piece you get spirit. Now I have an implicit spirit and no explicit spirit roll, but ideally you would have both implicit and explicit, but that's what we got. But every other roll on gear can be dedicated entirely to defense. So it's very important to get as much resistances as you can. You can see currently I'm at 76 fire, 76 cold, and 60 lightning. But when you consider this charm, I'm getting actually an extra 25% lightning res, so I'm also capped on lightning, and my chaos is 50%. This is super, super important for mitigating elemental damage, but it becomes even more important when you look at Altered Flesh. I'm not going to get too deep into the math, but I'm going to give you guys a TLDR of why this passive is so powerful. At a face level, it doesn't seem that crazy. You know, percent of cold damage taken as fire, percent of lightning taken as fire. But this is actually quite powerful because when different mobs have different pierces, right? So like you might have a mob that does cold damage and reduces cold resistance or pierces cold resistance. And by converting a percentage of that damage into fire, you're dodging that resistance pierce with the damage conversion. And the second part of this, which is the physical damage taken as chaos, is actually incredibly powerful, despite the fact that we're an ES build. So because we're playing energy shield, the chaos damage is actually going to do double damage to our energy shield, but because we have so much chaos damage reduction, this ends up being a net positive when paired with armor. So the mob hits you, right? He does like some damage to you, some physical damage. 20% of that damage will get converted to chaos. Then 20% of that damage will go into the Hellhound, so you're mitigating 40% of the damage. Then the rest of it hits your armor, and armor is more effective the bigger the difference between the armor and the hit that you were hit by. So the end result is that armor ends up being crazy valuable because we're converting so much of the physical damage from hits away from physical damage, and that allows our armor to absolutely kick butt. And you can see all of our gear is going to be armor and ES because we're trying to get as much armor as we can to mitigate those physical hits, and we're trying to stack ES to have a larger life pool to work with. Now, this build will have some adjustments once you get to the deeper into the ascendancy tree, because we're going to be reserving 50% of our life and converting all of that life into both energy shield and spirit. So the build is actually going to be tankier at that point, and I'll make an updated build guide when we get there. The ascendancies are very difficult, okay? It's probably going to get nerfed, we'll see. Right now they're very difficult, but in this version you're going to get tankier and do a lot more damage once you can get those. So I think one other thing that's worth mentioning is the fact that we're using a shield. A shield is extremely powerful because it has block chance, it has damage reduction, it has resistances. It is just really good. Armor, ES, the shields are wonderful. So basically with your gear, TLDR, what makes good gear? Your scepter is going to be almost all your damage. The most important thing is going to be minion skill ranks and percent spirit. The second most important thing is going to be the double crit. Allies in your presence have double crit. And then on gear, you're just looking to max out your resistances, particularly chaos and fire, because we're converting other types of damage into chaos and fire. So with regards to your army composition, there's really 3 main mobs that you should consider running, which is the Skeletal Brute, the Skeletal Arsonist, and the Skeletal Cleric. The Brute is just a monstrous frontline who does insane damage, is extremely difficult to kill, and is just an incredible unit. The uppercuts that they do whenever they stun enemies is absurdly powerful. It does crazy AoE damage, and these guys are monsters. I always play with at least 2 Skeletal Brutes, because them plus the Hellhound creates a very powerful frontline wall, and their damage is incredible. It's always going, and your backline, when they die, you're in trouble. You need tanky mobs to keep threat, or you're gonna die. And that's where the Skeletal Arsonists come in. So actually, technically, I would much prefer to run a full Skeletal Brute army if I could, but the problem is melee mobs get stuck on each other, they get stuck in corridors, they get stuck on everything. So what I like to do is I play, like I said, 2 Brutes, the Hellhound, and then I play Skeletal Arsonist with like Feeding Frenzy, so they do more damage but take more damage, Scatter Shot for additional projectiles, and then currently Minion Mastery. I'm not entirely sure yet what I want to run for my 3rd gem, but Minion Mastery is pretty good, and these guys are going to be sitting in the back throwing grenades, doing tons of damage. And what the idea is, you put firewalls in front of them so their grenades go through the firewalls. The firewall adds to their damage, then that gets multiplied by your minion damage, then it gets multiplied by your crit. So the firewalls end up adding about 18% damage to your skeletal arsonist, which is quite a bit. And yeah, they're just going to be pumping in the backline while your brutes tank. And then when you're doing difficult AoE content, or maybe bossing, depending on some things, you can opt for a skeletal cleric. For the 15 that I did, it felt much better with a cleric. But whenever I'm doing speed farming, doing lower tier maps, I drop the cleric for more damage. But yeah, when you're doing hard content, the cleric is wonderful to run, and I like to run him with arcane tempo for more cast speed. And there aren't really any other gems that are high value on him, so just make sure he has arcane tempo and he's gonna res your minions, he's gonna heal them. If you don't know, his heal is a heal over time, so he spreads it out over your whole army. He's gonna keep everyone topped off in gaming. Now, the other thing I want to talk about is on boss fights, it's technically best to drop all of your Arcanist or Arsonist for skeletal brutes, especially if you're doing a hard fight. If you're doing a hard fight, your Arsonist will be dead the entire fight and they will do no damage at all. It is awful. But, if you're doing easier content, it's fine. Just leave on the Arsonist, put up your flame walls. It'll be fine. It's chill. But when you get into harder content, I much prefer to just run as many brutes as I possibly can, maybe a cleric, but generally I just run an army of brutes and just let them beat the crap out of the boss. Because, they're so durable, they do so much damage. It is a very powerful thing to do. The last thing I want to talk about is Pain Offering. So with Pain Offering, you're generally going to be trying to target an Arsonist in the backline, and you want to kind of target an Arsonist that's kind of in the middle of the field. So your brutes will be pushing forward and your Arsonist will be here, and then a lot of times there's going to be an Arsonist kind of in the middle, and that's the guy that you want to hit with your Pain Offering. And Pain Offering is going to give a crazy amount of damage. It's giving them 30% attack speed and a 45% damage multiplier. That's crazy. You run Font of Rage, so it gives rage to your dudes, which is going to increase their damage even more. And then we're playing Ablation, which is going to give them 30% more effect on the Pain Offering. So it's going to be 30% more attack speed, 30% more damage. And but the offset is that it's going to cost life whenever we cast it. This is kind of annoying, actually. And I think there's more I want to do with Pain Offering. I want to test out running +1 limit and eating 2 Arsonist. There's honestly so much more room for this build to grow. It's already incredibly powerful. I'm clearing not the hardest content in the game, but the hardest baseline content, right? Map 15. Obviously there's all kinds of crazy stuff that scales it even higher. But just at a baseline, already doing map 15 is pretty dang good. And yeah, the build is tanky, does a lot of damage, and that's going to do it for today's video. I hope you guys liked it. I hope you guys liked the build. Let me know in the comments down below what other stuff you want to know if you like this kind of build, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace out, gamers.